always bring about good policies, right? Right? Okay, sometimes things go awry, but there is a growing debate around the country as to whether or not we should be offering, from a governmental level, paid family leave. You have a baby, you have some other need, you get to take off work, and you don't get financially put behind by that. Well, that sounds great, but is that something that should be a mandated government program? I'm Mike Ferguson. I am now joined by Mattias Gugel. He is with the National Taxpayers Union, where he is the Director of State External Affairs. Mattias, first, let's define what we're talking about here. An increasing number of states, or at least having the debate about saying we're going to have a paid leave program. What are the policies being proposed? And then we'll talk about what's good and bad about them.
Yeah, well, first of all, thanks for having me, Mike. I appreciate you reaching out and having interest in this topic. I think first and foremost, as we look at paid family leave, I think the first word is what's so interesting there is paid, because someone has to pay for it, first of all. When we look at these different proposals across the country, we obviously have currently an unpaid family leave program federally, which allows a person the ability to take unpaid leave from their employer when they have a baby, when they're trying to build that relationship with their child. So that's already in place. But what we're starting to see pop up, and we're starting to see it mostly on the coast, so we're seeing it in states like California and New York. We're also seeing it in states like Colorado and starting to pop up over the homeland, but we're seeing paid family leave come in. And I think what is so important from the taxpayer's perspective is you have to ask the question, who is paying for this?
Now, when we come to the proposals that we'll get into here in a second, a lot of times somebody is saying, well, let's model this after, something like Social Security. I mean, we want Social Security to pay for our retirement years, and so we pay a small tax into it, and then we can dip into the fund. Is that kind of similar to what's being proposed around the country?
It is to a certain extent, in that actually the same pot of money is what's largely being dipped into. So we're looking at the payroll tax. So we're seeing money that is taken straight out of your paycheck that is going to pay for it. It's also true in the fact that you're not paying into any sort of fund that you then get to dip out of. So when you put those dollars into a program, it's not like that's being saved for you to eventually use someday. That's going to use to pay for the current ongoing cost of the program.
So really, we're talking about an entitlement program by definition.
Certainly. And to a certain extent, I don't want to demean everyone who pays all this money. I mean, taxpayers are paying for these programs. They're not paying enough for it, certainly, as we see these entitlements expand and expand and expand. But when you pay this money going in every single paycheck, every 2 weeks, you see this money going into a program, you want to see it there eventually when you need it. So I think lawmakers and policymakers, when they consider these proposals, really have to be careful about how they structure it. And states especially have to be careful about it, because when you see the Social Security debate that's always ongoing and it's eternal, and we just never really seem to get much resolve over how we're going to pay for that long term, states don't have the ability to carry on the massive amount of debt or to print money the way the federal government does. So really, taxpayers are going to bear the brunt of the cost of these programs.
We are visiting with Mattias Gugel from the National Taxpayers Union. Okay, I think, Mattias, we probably should step back a little bit, and somebody would argue, but other advanced countries around the world, they all have some kind of mandatory paid leave. It's a right, and you shouldn't be financially penalized for bonding with your child or caring for a parent or whatever the program looks like. So as much as the financial aspect and the mechanics are going to work, is there a discussion over what should be considered a right from a public policy perspective?
Well, certainly we can have that discussion over rights, but when we talk about rights in America, we're constantly talking about those inalienable rights that are put in our Constitution. That's how we're, frankly, a lot different than other countries that are looking at this. But it's hard to say that something's a right that someone has to pay for at the end of the day, that someone has to, out of their taxes every single week, have a couple percentage points taken out of it, which is real dollars that goes towards food and groceries, that those dollars need to go to a program that isn't in your own control, and that is going for this sort of greater good notion. So I think when we look at that, it will have to be paid for. And I think that's really where we at the National Taxpayers Union look into this, is how do you create something that is sustainable, that makes taxpayers comfortable with it, that is a burden that they can understand? Because what we're seeing right now, and we actually just had a lot of the state tax data come out from when people paid their taxes and filed their taxes last month, we're seeing true migration happening from high tax states to low tax states. So taxes are certainly something that people are taking into this entire conversation, and we get to look at it in a competitive way, not entirely nationally with U.S. versus what's happening in Sweden or Norway or other European countries that might have this, but we get to see about how it's working from California to what's happening in Missouri, to what's happening in Wisconsin, to what's happening in Florida. And in those ways, we're actually seeing true migration from high tax states to low tax states.
The article that Mattias and Jess Ward wrote is called "The Bad Family Leave Policy Sweeping the Nation," and you can find that in a variety of publications, but you can certainly find it at the National Taxpayer Union's website, which we'll give out here in just a moment. Do we have any, at least preliminary data of the places that have put a program like this into place to see whether or not it is working or providing good or bad incentives when it comes to the workplace or in the economy overall?
So what I can say is that when we saw it enacted in the state of Washington, Washington initially didn't collect enough money to pay the paid leave requests that happened. So what happened is they put this program in place. They said, you know what, we are going to take a certain amount of taxes from you to cover the cost. The program was so popular that it has, in the last couple of years since its creation, they've had to double the amount of money they take from taxpayers to cover the cost of the program. So I think taxpayers really need to be wary about what is being proposed, because government wants to grow. It just constantly wants to grow. And the initial estimates that you're going to see are going to be conservative for how much it's going to actually cost you. And taxpayers need to be very smart and make sure their voices are heard on these issues. They need to make sure that they're talking to their state legislators so that when these policies are considered, the dollars and cents are an important part to that equation.
I guess it's really easy to be generous with other people's money as well. Okay. The article, once again, called "The Bad Family Leave Policy Sweeping the Nation." Mattias, where do we find that, and where can people connect with you if they want to follow your work?
Certainly. NTU.org, National Taxpayers Union, NTU.org is where you can find a lot of our blogs and a lot of our research. We're doing good work, not only on the payroll tax, but also on your federal taxes as well. And then personally, you can follow me on Twitter at Mattias Gugel. That's a weird name. Mattias Gugel, Gugel, at Twitter. So Mattias Gugel.
All right, Mattias, appreciate the conversation. I know a lot of states are trying to push this, so I really appreciate getting out in front of it.
Awesome. Thanks a lot, Mike.
Just ahead, when it comes